of Economic Development at the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation, which is a privately funded and governed regional economic development organization serving more than 70 communities across a 9-county region along Colorado's Front Range. In his role, Sam oversees the business recruitment, retention, and expansion efforts of the Metro Denver region, working in partnership with state, county, and local economic developers to secure job creation and capital investment. Sam's extensive experience has supported the recruitment and expansion of nearly 16,000 jobs from companies such as Amazon, Southwest Airlines, Strava, Vail Resorts, Lockheed Martin, just to name a few. A leader in his field, Sam has been recognized by Colorado Biz Magazine as one of Colorado's top 25 most influential young professionals and received the Public Service Recognition Award from the state of Colorado and United States Congress. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today, Sam. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you to the CU Denver family. Pleased to be partnering with you and look forward to the discussion today.
And I think with that, let's get some slides going.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining today to talk about the Metro Denver and the Colorado economy as we are hopefully looking at a path of emerging out of COVID-19. It certainly has been a challenging year, but I think what we have focused on here at the Metro Denver EDC really is resilience. So we're happy to have this conversation with CU Denver and keep the conversation going. A little bit about, we move on to the next slide, a little bit about the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation. We were founded in the 1980s as part of the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, really when we were a cow town with an oil problem. We had an economy that was successful in business failures, not successes. And what we found was businesses didn't look at where the city and county of Denver stopped and Aurora began. They looked at this as a region. And that's really how we promote the Metro Denver region, that we're better as a collective than an individual set of communities. Today, we represent 9 counties and 70 communities across Colorado's Front Range, from the Wyoming border all the way south to Castle Rock and everything in between. We are a privately funded and privately governed organization, meaning that about 280 investors from small companies to large companies across this region invest in our efforts to attract and expand companies in the region, as well as national marketing efforts. We are the first regional economic development group that was privately funded and governed in the United States, and we support our partners at both local, county, and state levels to ensure that we elevate the region first. This region represents about 75% of the state's population, about 80% of the state's gross domestic product. So this is a strong economic engine here. And you can see some of the recent projects we've worked on, from VF Corporation, the parent company of the North Face, a Fortune 240 firm, to Maxar Technologies, a global imaging company up in Westminster, to Cute Infrastructure Group that's just about to finish their headquarters down in Lone Tree. So a little bit of background about us. As we move on to the next slide, I want to give you a perspective of the type of work that we do and how we do it. Everything in Colorado is focused on partnerships, and at Metro Denver, it's no different. We partner with organizations like the City of Denver's Economic Development Opportunity Office. I'm sitting right now in the City of Denver. We partner with the City of Denver's office, as well as with the Governor's Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and all of our county partners, whether it be in Boulder, in Weld County, in Larimer County, Douglas and Arapahoe counties. We treat them all as partners, and again, we all work to leverage the region. We break up our work in areas of focus into a couple different categories. So global business development, that's identifying domestic and international companies that we want to attract to the Metro Denver region, or existing companies that we want to support expanding here. About 50% of our work is helping companies already in Colorado, so homegrown companies, whether they have 5 to 20 employees or thousands of employees. Site selection and economic development support. So oftentimes when we work with companies, like many of our clients today, they're asking us to help them identify potential real estate. So find me 50 acres to construct a $500 million capital investment project that's going to handle the manufacturing for the aerospace industry. Aligning workforce development programs. Those are the types of things that we focus on. Data and analytics, you'll see in everything that we do, and just about every other word coming out of my mouth is going to be some data point. We focus on data because that helps drive not just our strategy, but how we best support our clients. The State Office of Economic Development, International Trade, and the Colorado Tourism Office spend money on marketing Colorado primarily on a tourism standpoint. We do partner as well with other organizations. We focus our efforts on marketing the business standpoint. We want to ensure that we talk about live and play, but the ability to conduct a business, to grow a business, that we market in targeted markets. We maintain relationships with corporate executives and the consultants that represent them, called site selectors, in identifying Colorado as the place to invest. And so we're very much in the relationship business, as well as our economic development, what I'll call concierge. We're not just in the business of businesses, we're also in the business of people. So helping families that are impacted by an economic development project, making sure their kids can get into public schools, that they can purchase homes here, and also tackling some of the challenges that come with public policy, permitting, planning, zoning. So we take a very holistic approach. And as we move into the next slide, you'll see that that approach has allowed us to be nimble to support a diverse industry of companies. So from Charles Schwab, who has roughly 5,000 employees down Lone Tree, to Smuckers. For those of you who are parents, the Smuckers facility in Longmont manufactures 2 million Uncrustables a day. It is the largest capital investment in the J.M. Smucker Company's history. Who knew peanut butter and jelly could be so amazing? To companies like Slack and Salesforce that we've seen make investments here in Denver. And even through the pandemic, we focused on, as companies have departed, like AstraZeneca leaving Boulder, we walked in to a pandemic, to an economic downturn as a result of that health crisis, and we're able to recruit AGC Biologics to backfill the displaced jobs. So economic development is all about adaptability and execution. And just to give you a perspective of what our team is working on today, as we move into the next slide, we're staying busy. As we've come out of the pandemic, we've seen a pretty substantial increase in our prospect pipeline. So our team today is working on just over 40 prospects. And in fact, as of today, this is now 46, looking to attract about 11,000 jobs from new and existing companies. So again, some companies that aren't here, as well as companies that are currently here that are considering expanding in Colorado or another market. That entire pipeline represents about $3.6 billion in capital investment, generating taxable revenue for communities, school districts, the state. All these projects we work on in partnership with local governments, county governments, sub-regional economic development groups, as well as the State Office of Economic Development. So it's never one member of a team, it is an economic development team that helps support these projects. And if you want to know a little bit more about some of the work that we do, it's not always seen here in the Metro Denver region. Oftentimes we are targeting specific companies that we believe are quality employers that create quality jobs, provide great wages and benefits in relation to our region. We target them with marketing because we want to tell the story that it's more than just sunshine and mountains. There's a lot more to offer. So the last thing I'll leave you with is a quick video from our Room to Roam campaign, which has been going through COVID and has been re-upped since to keep the momentum going here in Colorado. Please bear with us on the technology with Zoom and videos. Oh, sorry, one more slide before that. One thing I will leave you with is a bit of a SWOT analysis on our economic competitiveness. You know, the benefit that we have in Colorado, we have a diversified set of industries. We have phenomenal connectivity through Denver International Airport. It's the largest economic driver in the state of Colorado, so keeping that airport humming along is really important for us. We have a skilled and attractive workforce. Over 42% of our population has a bachelor's degree or higher, which is great. However, that leaves 58% of our population that does not have that advanced degree. So how we help them get a quality job in the workforce is vital. Some of the threats that we see, there's an anti-growth sentiment that's growing in parts of our community, and there are public policy choices both at the legislature and at the ballot that are, I think, vilifying businesses, and we need to be careful as to how we balance our investments, make sure we reduce our state's debt liabilities so that we can invest in the future. You know, certainly as we look at infrastructure and water, the investments we need to make not only help businesses, but they help our people and help us expand housing opportunities in our communities. So certainly addressing those challenges. But as we look ahead, I think that we are situated well to recover and hopefully expand from there and find a balance between work-life balance and a connected environment that both supports domestic growth as well as attracts international investment. I'll leave you with one more slide before we jump into that video. My apologies for the misorder. Things to be hopeful for. Colorado's had the #1 economy 4 years running, according to U.S. News and World Report. Until recently, Utah showed up. One of Utah's greatest investments they've made, infrastructure. That's something that we need to keep an eye on. So #2 ain't bad, but we always love being #1. We have the fourth highest labor force participation rate in the United States, meaning more of our people are participating in the workforce, and that's a good thing. Prior to the pandemic, so prior to March of 2020, we actually had the number one, we were number one in the percentage of workers from home. 8.6% of our workers were already working home pre-pandemic. So we were pretty prepared for that challenge. Our diverse industry clusters, we're not just an oil town with a cow problem. We have diverse industry clusters across our 9 counties. So we're not dependent on one single industry or type of employer when the economy has a downturn, and in this case, as a result of a health emergency. We think we're well positioned and that we have employers that are focused on ensuring that there are priorities in talent and workforce and balance and quality of life to see quality job creation come back following this pandemic. Now, I will leave you with a video that will highlight our Room to Roam campaign.
Sam, thank you for the great background and context that you have provided. One of the things that you started off your conversation about was this idea of resiliency and the industry clusters that exist. I'd like for you to, kind of jump right in with, when we think about COVID, what type of impact has COVID had on those clusters? And what does the recovery look like for our state?
Absolutely. I will say that I'll start with the areas where we actually saw growth during COVID and then discuss some of the areas that were definitely impacted. So we walked into COVID with an unemployment rate less than 2.5%. And back in old econ classes, it was anything less than 5% was considered full employment, but that changed between 2017 and 2019 into 2020. So industries like aerospace grew about 11.2% in the last year, bioscience nearly 1%, financial services about 1.1%, IT software grew 9%, and then food and beverage production and what we call agritech grew nearly 3%. So these areas that could handle both the remote working scenario. Some were mission critical essential industries because of their reliance on either the Department of Defense or some federal contract. Others just have the luxury of being able to be remote type jobs. So employers were able to pivot quite quickly and still see demand for their services and goods. So again, aerospace, bioscience, financial services, IT software, food and beverage production continued to see growth in 2020. Now, there were employers who were individually impacted, who either had to adjust, had to have layoffs as a result of just the pandemic and the uncertainty, but those were very resilient. Areas that we certainly felt the impact in, aviation, no one was getting on a plane, dropped about 7.5%. So quite big there. And we're major hubs for United Airlines, Southwest Airlines. Again, when I mentioned that airport is a big economic driver, when we're not pushing people through those TSA lines, getting onto planes, that impacts the aviation industry. Digital communication saw a little decrease, about 1%. Health and wellness, people didn't always realize, but hospitals were really hitting on hard times. They weren't able to have elective surgeries for a number of months. So they were finding that they had increased demand for services, but declining revenue. So the health and wellness industry was certainly impacted. The ability not to have in-person services in many cases, quite challenging. The energy industry, and for us, that's from everything from traditional to renewable and everything in between, large companies, small companies, dropped about 4.5%. That's a combination of challenges that we saw in global markets as well as local policies. So certainly an impact there. But if you look at about 45% of the jobs that were lost truly came down to leisure and hospitality in 2020. And so many of those jobs were wages less than $60,000 a year. So frontline workers in the service industry. And if we look at all those jobs, 80% of the total jobs were really classified as low wage type jobs. So for, our perspective is if you earn $60,000 or more and fell into one of our growing industries, you really didn't experience the pandemic like many others. Yes, there are individual circumstances, spouses, significant others that may have had job loss or interruptions, but we really found that the greatest bulk of the impact hit our low wage workers in leisure and hospitality type industries.
And of course, that leads me to think, how are we going to bounce forward then, for those who have had that type of significant impact?
Great question. We hope that those impacted are reaching out to their previous employer who sees the ability to bounce back. We've also had industries really step up and say, we want to help offset those challenges. So one great example, the financial services industry, as I mentioned, they grew by about a percentage last year. Companies like Fidelity, Charles Schwab, Bank of America have actually been hiring through the pandemic. And so those industries have reached out to us. Our organization runs the Colorado Investment Services Coalition. So companies like Fidelity, Charles Schwab, TIAA, Transamerica, Janus Henderson come together to focus on talent cultivation, even as competitors with institutions of higher education like CU Denver. They came to us and really said, how can we help those that have been put out of work get a quality job in the financial services industries and make that pivot? So I think that we're seeing a balance of either employees returning to their previous employer or other industries stepping up to say, we want to create a pivot and that opportunity for those impacted employees to come work for us.
Great. So it sounds like because we have these cluster industries and a diverse portfolio, so to speak, that's really what's poising us to be ready and to be resilient, using that word to kind of bounce forward as we move forward through the COVID recovery.
Absolutely. And that's something that we focused on, is that this was a global health emergency that triggered a shutdown in the economy, not the other way around. This isn't 2008 or 2009, where you have a massive meltdown of the economic financial sector. Mm-hmm. This was a health emergency, and it forced us to push pause on our economy. And that created challenges from large to small companies with really just uncertainty. There were changes happening at the local, county, state, federal level, and we just didn't know what to expect. And so I think we will see, though, companies pull out of this. A massive amount of stimulus funding at both the federal and state level has been put in, and we'll have to see how that money is best deployed so that people can get back to work. Our focus is, let's put people back to work in quality jobs, make sure people have access and can get a vaccine, and that we can reopen the economy.
Absolutely. And I've been seeing a Winston Churchill quote pretty regularly about, never letting a good crisis go to waste. What are some of the things that we should continue doing that maybe we've learned from this situation?
Yeah, I think certainly one of the things we've tracked and what's been the most alarming is how this pandemic has impacted people based on race, on gender. It has not been an even impact. And, in September 2020, for every one male that was departing the workforce, 4 women were departing the workforce. That's problematic that we're seeing departures. When you look at how the pandemic has affected unemployment, whether you be white, Black, Latin, Native American, it is not even across racial and ethnic diversity. We need to focus on making sure that regardless of race, regardless of gender, you can get back to work in a high quality job. One of the efforts that we've launched here at the Metro Denver EDC and the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce is something called Prosper Colorado. We actually started it in 2018, pre-pandemic, when we were at the height of our economy. Those barriers existed then. And COVID only highlighted just the degree to which they exist now. So we've been working with employers to be able to map jobs and identify how can you eliminate things such as certain certificate requirements, offer quality wages, benefits, create pathways where you're communicating with populations to ensure that they can see themselves in your company and working for a company like yours. So I think what we continue to focus on is reaching out into the community to show people we want them in the workforce. We want them working for our companies, and trying to find ways to eliminate those disparities, because COVID has only highlighted the fact that they are still very real here in Colorado.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to something that you were saying earlier about that's also where you can partner with institutions like the University of Colorado to help close some of those gaps and develop some of those programs. Kind of staying in that same train of thought, what are some of the things that maybe we shouldn't do going forward or we should abandon?
Absolutely. Well, I think more than anything, institutions like CU Denver are really focused on how do we cultivate the next generation leaders? How do we help people make a change in their career? What are the credits and modules that we can be taking on to enhance our resumes? Some of the things that we certainly are concerned about looking forward that we hope we can abandon. You know, in Colorado, there is a bit of an anti-growth sentiment. It's anti-business. It's not in my backyard. And it comes, you know, down to communities and citizens saying, I don't want affordable housing next to me. I'm all for helping anyone, but don't put it in my backyard. Or I don't want that business moving in, even if the property is owned commercial or industrial. What we're starting to see is some serious friction in communities between residents and businesses. And what we're focused on is how can those work in harmony together? And how can communities be thoughtful in planning for business to come in and also respect residents? I think there's been a vilification of businesses, that it's been seen as corporations coming in and buying land and chasing our residents. It's really not been the case. I mean, we saw this with companies like Medtronic looking to invest in their new campus and several large open plots of land far away from the main streets of towns where they were chased out. And that's a problem. Companies like life-saving leaders that want to invest millions and millions of dollars in taxable revenue that pay for schools and fire departments, if they can't catch a break, then who can during a global pandemic? And it's not a break in terms of give me something. It's we're looking to invest in here. We want to buy this land that's for sale. We want to create jobs. We have over 3,000 employees in Boulder County. How can this happen? So that vilification of businesses. And then I think we need to be really smart. You know, Colorado has an interesting financial structure between Tabor and our state legislature. You know, one of the things that we actually opposed was the reduction of the corporate income tax rate from 4.63% to 4.55%. You'd think economic developers would be reduced corporate income tax rate. No, absolutely not. That's money we need to keep to reinvest in things like infrastructure, education, making sure that we reduce our unfunded debt liability of our pension system. I think we're really at that point where we need to abandon what might be politically well and focus on what's fiscally responsible. And that's really where we're pushing hard to ensure that we continuously invest in the future.
Well, and speaking about infrastructure, since it was one of the reasons that Utah has kind of edged us out into that #1 spot, what type of investments in infrastructure should we be seeing?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that's most important, if you know the saying, whiskey's for drinking, water is for fighting in Colorado, we are a scarce resource state. And what that means is that creates limitations for our growth, both in adding homes, apartments, businesses being able to locate here and create quality jobs. So making sure that we have a long-term and financed water plan. That's something we've advocated for since the get-go. And certainly with the state legislature, we're articulating just how important it is that we fund and see that plan through. Roads and bridges, the ability to connect people, our investments in transit and how we move people across the region. Where I'm from in the city of Chicago, I moved here in 2007, but in Chicago, you'd be a fool to drive your car into downtown. You take the train because the transit is so great, connected people everywhere. RTD, we need to get people back on and riding and create better connectivity. We have good regional connectivity, but we need to focus on the intercity connectivity to ensure that residents, especially those frontline workers that are going to our grocery stores, our restaurants, our hospitals, can connect and not be reliant solely on a car. So I think that's something that we need to focus on, is how we connect and move people across our region. And then when I think of infrastructure too, as someone who enjoys the outdoors, our public spaces, that is one of the things that we love, that we support. Our organization actually helps create the Regional Air Quality Control Commission so we can preserve our great environment. And we don't want it to be a conga line from the parking lot to Mount Bierstadt. We want to invest in infrastructure so people can get to trails all over the state of Colorado.
No, that's wonderful. And I know something we've talked about salaries a couple times. Something that I hear pretty consistently is how salaries are not keeping pace with the cost of living in our state. What are some of the things that are being done to help with that?
I would say not enough. Certainly, we've seen wages increase, but not nearly at the rate of the cost of housing, which is, I think, one of the biggest challenges the Metro Denver region faces. Albeit, you can live urban, rural, suburban, and mountain in our 9-county area. But if you look at it, places like Boulder County have the 6th most expensive housing market in the United States. Denver's about 17th. Right now in the city of Denver, there's probably less than 1,200 single-family detached homes, so single-family homes, on the market, which means prices are going up. Houses are going for $100,000 over asking price. If you are a working professional, making the jump from an apartment to a home is nearly impossible. And with the history of our construction defects, we never were able to create a really solid and foundational condominium market. And so the jump from the apartment to the home is so great, it can really be difficult, impossible for an individual or family to purchase that home. The investment in that middle market allows people to step by step to create that wealth. And one of the biggest factors of wealth creation is home ownership. And that's something we're working with, again, through Prosper, in identifying how can we best leverage public land, city-owned land, distressed malls, and convert those into affordable housing opportunities. How do we increase density of housing, especially around transit, so that we maximize transit and ensure that most people that live there can connect to from where they live to where they work using transit. So home ownership, when it comes to the cost of living, is definitely a factor that we can do a better job at. Places like Utah, Boise, Kansas City, Phoenix kind of point their finger at the Denver area and say they're the expensive ticket in town. You can have a quality job at half the housing cost, and that's a problem.
Absolutely. And as we're talking about the steps to help close some of those gaps, it's also making me think of what you were talking about earlier, where the majority of individuals who were impacted by COVID, were those earners making less than 60,000. As we're thinking about a lot of the social and racial justice movements that we're seeing, how does that impact our recovery?
Yeah, I think for us, it gives us really a sharper focus on, as we work with employers that either want to move here and create jobs, or existing employers that are having trouble attracting talent, really to say, let's look at your hiring practices. Let's look at what it means to be an inclusive employer. How are you marketing those jobs, the language you're using? How are you communicating with the community on those opportunities to ensure that you're creating a diverse talent pool and a diverse set of employees in your company? And one of the things that we have followed as part of our Prosper work is the Brookings Institution Metro Monitor report, which really tracks how communities are doing in terms of inclusivity and economic growth. And in 2021, I think one of the things that we saw is our median earnings in Denver rose about 22%, but we had gaps. And I would say the ranking that most troubles me is we rank number 43 out of 53 areas for the gap between white and people of color in terms of employment. That's a problem. Again, that shows that our economy is a bit lopsided. And we were number 6 for economic growth, number 7 for economic inclusion, number 10 for geographic inclusion, number 12 for racial inclusion, 14 for prosperity. But you can't be doing really well in one area and not address the areas where you're falling. So what we found and what we see employers being really receptive to is identifying what are the hiring practices I as an employer can take on to attract diverse candidates of all skill sets, whether they be a high school degree or a PhD and everything in between, stackable credentials, a university education. And I think what's been great, for CU Denver is we've been able to partner with institutions of higher education as employers look to grow in the Metro Denver region, being able to sit down at the front door of a university and say, here are the jobs we're looking to create. How does a university help our company grow from that entry-level employee to the seasoned employee who has, very deep skill sets in a particular area of focus? So I think that's where we're trying to merge public, private, and nonprofit priorities around how can we enhance hiring practices so that employers really think when they come to a place like Metro Denver, we're going to be the most inclusive employer in town.
No, that's great. And I mean, of course, we're not without, our own unique challenges, but it sounds like there's a lot of things that we've done, to poise ourselves to be able to have a strong recovery. What are we doing differently from maybe other states that's really setting us apart?
Sure. I think certainly as you look across all 50 states, I'm just about sure every state is thinking to themselves, we could have done that better, or we should have done that better. I think for us, we are seeing a lot of leadership led by the private sector on some recovery efforts in terms of looking out for the employees. There's been a big focus in economic development. 10 years ago, it was the tax person, the real estate person saying, here's where we're going to go, here's why we're going to go there. But now it's the chief human resource officer or the head of people that's making those decisions. So we do see employers looking at areas of addressing mental health, benefits, professional development, because they know there's a talent shortage. I think one thing that we have done better just naturally is the fact that in the COVID-19 pandemic world, I much rather be in quarantine in a place like Colorado than a super dense coastal market like San Francisco or New York. We've actually seen people relocate here so that they can have that balance. Certainly the deployment we had around COVID testing, and I think even with the COVID vaccines, granted we all want to get that done faster and faster so we can get back to normalcy, I think we've managed a pretty good approach. Certainly a challenge that we saw that we've tried to course correct on are kind of two major areas. One, if you're a business in Arapahoe County, but you do business in Denver County and you have employees in Boulder County, there were so many local, county, and state orders in terms of how to operate your business, what was safe and what was not. If you were a small business owner and didn't have a government affairs person looking out for you, or you weren't working with your Chamber of Commerce or Economic Development Group, it was impossible to figure out, was I in compliance? Was I doing the right thing? If I have employees here, there, how do I manage that? That's super difficult. The other area that we've seen as a challenge is the financial burden of this we are all going to have to pay for as taxpayers. The number of fraudulent claims that are being filed in our unemployment system. The biggest challenge is, one, someone who really needs that claim and needs that access to those funds, we need to get it to them ASAP. A fraudulent claim challenges that because it's not getting appropriate funds to the right people. It's also costing us, the taxpayers, because it jeopardizes our unemployment trust fund. So making sure that when it comes to unemployment, we reduce fraud and ensure the people who need it get it. So we've certainly had challenges in both the management and execution, and these are uncharted waters in terms of the pandemic and what it's generated. But I think, more than anything, if you look at the summer of last year, if you look at all 50 states, as well as Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., we were 50th in terms of unemployment, meaning that more of our people in Colorado kept jobs, with the exception of Utah and North Dakota. So again, we did a better job, and that's not to downplay the experience that anyone had who was impacted and found themselves unemployed, but it really focuses on the point that our resiliency really showed through the data that we were really best positioned to manage and hopefully then recover from the impact of this health crisis.
That's great to know. And I think that transitions nicely to my last question here. What are you hopeful for, or what are you looking forward to as we are recovering?
Great question. I think, since January, our pipeline of work has increased about 40%. So as of today, just even from the update of our slides, we're up to 46 clients, nearly 14,000 jobs, and 3.6 billion in our pipeline. And the average wages of all those industries and clients is about $97,000. So we feel that companies, existing and new, are refocused on bringing quality opportunities to Metro Denver and to Colorado. So we feel confident that we're going to be able to emerge quickly and get people back to work, much like we did almost a decade ago. I think the focus on talent, on mental health, on quality of life, we never saw the talent shortage go away. It's not like we came into this with record low unemployment and are leaving with all of our talent problems solved. And that's where partners like CU Denver, our university partners, our alternative education programs, this is a phenomenal opportunity to pivot your career, to go back to school, refresh your skills, to take on a credential, go through a program to enhance your skills so you have those resume building transferable job skills. So I'm hopeful that we have the right institutions, literally a stone's throw across the street. I can see CU Denver and MSU and the Community College of Denver right out our windows, that we're positioned to come back. And I'm hopeful that the investments we made decades ago have paid off, and we continue to see that. And it's just a matter of making sure that everyone who's in our community feels that they can access and has the capacity to access a quality job. That's really what our priority has been.
I think that was summarized so nicely, the word access and resiliency. Those are kind of the two words that I'm taking away from a lot of what you shared today. So thank you for that. I want to bring Allie back in to share some of the questions that have come in through the chat.
Yeah, and to your point just a little bit ago, Sam, a couple of people asked which cities are we competing with the most? Like when companies are coming up trying to decide between, you know, Denver and another city, are we very competitive, or who are we very competitive with?
Yeah, and I'll say when we say compete, the Metro Denver region, it's all those 9 counties and 70 communities. The areas that we compete with the most are Phoenix, Arizona, Dallas and Austin, Texas, Salt Lake City, Utah, Raleigh, Durham, Atlanta increasingly, and then Kansas City. Those show up the most frequently, but occasionally we'll see competition with either international locations or some smaller markets as well. But I would say on a day-to-day basis, places like Arizona and Texas are top of mind. Mostly companies from the coast that are looking in the middle of the country and figuring out where do we invest and where do we attract talent. And that's why places like Arizona, Texas, and Colorado show up.
Thank you. Another question that we had was, what do you think the effect of the current relief bill will be, and the effect on the newly proposed infrastructure bill as well?
So I think our states, counties, and cities are going to have a lot of work to do to plan and prioritize how that money is spent. Our kind of focus is what gets someone back to work in a safe manner with a small or large company. And so I think for us, we're going to have a big focus on obviously health and safety. Workforce training, we think, is going to be huge. Infrastructure that prepares us for the future that we can invest in today. I mean, think about this. RTD was built and funded for capacity that we haven't even seen yet. So we overbuilt for what we needed, but we benefit from that. Denver International Airport's no different. We can add 6 new non-intersecting runways to Denver International Airport and expand our growth. We don't need that today, but because we planned it, we are so much better off. We have one of the largest domestic networks in the United States. So I think, you know, for us, our big priority is what gets people back to work in a safe and healthy manner. I think for cities, they've been really impacted, you know, with restaurants not being able to serve people. Sales tax revenues are way down. How do we rebuild our city's financial health, our state's financial health, so that we can invest in things like education, healthcare, rainy day funds, which have been depleted on so many cases, and then certainly infrastructure. Our road problems didn't go away because we all stopped driving. Plenty of us were still driving, just to other places. So I think that's where we'll be heavily influencing, you know, our cities and our state to say, again, what puts a Coloradan back in a quality job in a safe manner.
I think along those lines, kind of what you were talking about, driving, if we shift back to the housing market, I know there was a question in here specifically about all the new luxury apartments that are going in. So what are your thoughts? Kind of, I know we touched about it a little bit on the housing crisis. I don't want to call it a crisis, the housing issue right now. And then especially when it comes to like affordable housing, you know, homelessness and things that kind of we saw increase more during COVID.
Yeah, I think, again, so much is new construction, so the price does come with that. We don't need an $800,000 condominium. We need a $200,000 condominium where someone can depart an apartment and buy a condominium and grow their wealth with that condos. So we need better access points. I think certainly something that we've seen is when we do affordable housing, we don't do it at such scale and density. I think density and growth can be bad words in the Metro Denver area. But if you have a transit stop and you're putting an affordable housing development there, or apartments or condos, we should be building to the sky and leveraging that, because it then encourages that condo or apartment renter to use mass transit, reducing cars off the road. So I think one of the challenges is that density and growth have been kind of bad words in Colorado when they shouldn't be, because you're growing housing opportunities. We should be growing both affordable housing units, and then what I would really attainable and accessible housing units. Condominiums from 250,000 to 300,000 would be huge in this market. I think just about everyone would put their hand up and be like, more of those, please, not an $800 or $1 million condo. And with single family homes, I think that's, a challenge. We're constricted somewhat on geography in some communities, but in other places, how can we make investments? And this is hard because communities don't have the funds to invest in infrastructure. They have to rely on things like metro districts. How do we invest in infrastructure in a way that encourages home builders to build a more cost-efficient home? My wife and I, we have a home in University Hills. We've done updates to it, but the challenge is we're competing with existing homeowners, people coming from out of state, and it's cost prohibitive. Houses going for $100,000 over asking price. People don't have that kind of money sitting on the sidelines. So I think what we're trying to do, especially through our Prosper work, is how do we better utilize land? How do we better utilize the strip mall that is no longer active and invest in quality housing opportunities at a price point where someone who is making $50,000 a year can enter the market and start to build wealth?
There's a lot of questions coming in, kind of how COVID now we're kind of shifting a little bit to your point about how, especially with housing, it's changed. But if we focus on work, obviously a lot of people are working from home right now. You can tell I'm in my home right now. And how do you think people are going to go back to work? Do you think people or companies are going to want to have more people working from home, more flexibility, full in time? I think we've all seen the signs of big buildings downtown that are for rent or for sale.
So I just took my virtual background down. I'm in the office right now. I swear I don't have a whiteboard in my office/guest room. I think for us, this is really going back to employer practices. The commercial real estate in downtown is really suffering. And when that suffers, restaurants suffer, coffee shops suffer. It really, you can't create that energy without people going into work. I think what we're going to see is some hybrid model where employers are going to say, these are the days in the office, you get a flex or 2 flex days a week to work from home. A couple different things. So my wife and I definitely have too small of a home for a global pandemic, and we have an 18-month-old. So I'm very excited to be back in the office, back at work. Many people are like, I'm ready to be back. Because the thing about working from home, it's hard to build culture behind a Zoom screen. We all have Zoom fatigue or Teams fatigue, whatever you want to call it. That's hard to do. And I think companies are battling, how do we build our culture back? How do we welcome new people into our company? And how do we also balance challenges? I mean, we have members of our team, there's going to be child camps or kid camps that aren't open this summer. That creates a childcare challenge. I have a kid myself. There's challenges that come with that. You have a spouse or significant other who has another work challenge. Not everyone has the space to work from home or the connectivity. That's been a huge disparity as well in terms of telecommunications connectivity. Comcast has been a great partner in offering an essentials program to get people back and connected to access Wi-Fi. But I think employers are going to try a variety of starts and stops around flexibility, some remote work, in-office work. I think commercial real estate is going to look different, but not so radically different. The big office that was 100,000 square feet might be 75,000 or 50,000 with some hoteling, different office setup. But I think there's also desire for people to go back to work, to engage. I mean, in Colorado, we are all about people, and I think people want to be back in a safe way. I think what you'll see is a lot of different attempts to try and find the right fit, but it's going to be different, whether you're in financial services, if you've been in aerospace manufacturing, you haven't been working from home, you've been working at a facility. So I think there's still a TBD, but we partner with organizations like JLL, CBRE, Newmark, and Cushman to look at what's going on in terms of commercial real estate. Industrial has been growing gangbusters. I mean, that's really been unique. It's been a very different story. So I think, for the offices, there's a big focus on talent. How do I retain my talent? What can I do with my real estate to help retain that talent?
Yeah, and one of the questions I have actually heard come up in my job too is how are we, we're getting all these great organizations to come in and set up shop, but how are we, really engaging them to make sure that they're hiring people that are here too?
Yeah.
That we're protecting jobs for people here. And I think when you kind of mentioned the, adversity to growth, that bringing in all these people from, XYZ places, and when there's qualified people here, I think what are kinds of the things that organizations are doing, or how can we do more to make sure that our talent is taken here too?
Yeah, the first thing to note is when you see a headline of a company coming to Colorado, oftentimes 5 to 10 people are actually moving as a result of it. That company has selected Metro Denver because they plan to scale locally. So for example, Checker, a company that is a technology leader in background checks and also fair chance hiring, so educating employers as to how to hire people who've come into contact with the correctional system, they only moved about 15, what they call pioneers here, to set up the office. They've done all of their other hiring locally. Same with Salesforce, same with Slack. Oftentimes it's a small team that's moving here to start the office, but that they're taking advantage of our local talent. So that's one important thing to point out, that a lot of the people who are being hired are Coloradans. They are people who are already here looking for a quality job. When we work with companies, there's a couple things that we say, happy to work with you, and no thanks, you should look somewhere else. We really strive to only attract companies that pay at or above the average annual wage of the county where they're going to locate it. So we want to make sure we have a diversity of jobs from entry level to high skill. But I wouldn't want to attract a company into downtown Denver whose average wage was $30,000, because the average annual wage in downtown Denver right now is about $71,000. That company, one, wouldn't be set up for success to attract talent. And at those wages, that's not good for our residents to have a $30,000 a year job in a community where the average annual wage is $71,000. That's the challenge that we put back on the companies to say, if you're going to be employ people here, we want to connect you with other leaders. And we do this all the time with CEOs and chief human resource officers who say, here's what it takes to be an employer of choice. The types of wages, the type of benefits. We've actually turned away business. That's the benefit of being a private organization, is we can say to companies, and we have, and they've called us names for it, your wages and the benefits you're providing are not on par with our community. And for that reason, we'd be happy to introduce you to a lower cost market either outside of our region or outside of Colorado, because we don't think you'll be successful here, and you're not setting our residents up for financial success. That's something that often doesn't get reported, but we spend a lot of time qualifying companies to say, are they going to be a good employer in this region? Are they going to create a good benefit for Joe or Jane in Colorado? And if not, we're happy to say to them, you're going to struggle and our people would struggle working for you. So this isn't a fit.
Oh, that's great. I think kind of to that point, are you finding the landscape, like I know you talked about the different clusters of industry, are you finding the landscape looking different because, new companies are coming in? Like you mentioned, I think VF, or I was up there on their, obviously more of an outdoor company. So, and that's pretty big here in Colorado, but are you seeing those clusters shift, that landscape kind of shift, and what kinds of jobs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in terms of the kind of jobs, we always try to find intersections. So like VF, parent company, the North Face, they were also looking at Oregon because Nike had done so much of the apparel industry there. VF is the intersection of lifestyle and commerce. And in fact, we have institutions like CU Denver who were part of that process, CSU Fort Collins and their apparel program. So we actually used our universities to help attract a Fortune 240 company that really works well in our community. I think what we're seeing is it's hard to differentiate one industry from another. We always joke any company over 10 people is a tech company. And tech is blended into so many industries. I think what we found is we're starting to focus still on industry clusters, but we're starting to migrate over to talent clusters. So where are clusters of data scientists? Because a data scientist is going to be just as successful and busy at a tech firm, as a financial services firm, at an energy firm. And so what we're starting to see is what are the talent clusters we can identify here where we have competitive advantage, and also be able to say to universities, here is the high demand talent clusters. How are we sourcing people from our universities into these talent clusters? Because that person who comes into that cluster can learn that they have an opportunity in aviation, aerospace, digital communications, tech, financial services, those transferable type jobs. I think that's really what we want to focus on, because again, those will generally be the most resilient and they're not confined to just one industry. So that's really where our work and about really people is pivoting. How do we best promote our talent and prepare our talent for diverse industry opportunities?
Yeah, that was great. That actually kind of leads me into my last question here. And Lindsey, feel free to chime in. Just speaking from my own experience at CU when I went back for my MBA, I think the best thing I got out of that is realizing that my job outside was not going to be like one path. I wasn't going to be a doctor, much to my dad's disappointment. But, I think what I really gained out of that is this kind of what you're saying, like all of these different kinds of skills that are so transferable. So I think what are some takeaway points that I know most of the people on here are alumni, but what are some of like the takeaway points? Like what are you seeing is really kind of coming up, or what are skills that you want to see, or organizations that want to see from either new graduates or, you go back for your graduate degree or additional course of study, even some of the just like, certificate programs that you can get. Like, what are those kinds of skills that are really transferable?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that employers want to see right now is how have you invested in yourself? And is that through an advanced degree? Is it through a certificate program, a module, a training course? One of the things that we really highlight when we are working with employers is there are very few economies where we have an institution of higher education literally across the street from the central business district. Like it is literally right there. And we, I think, say to companies as well as to employees, look at how you invest in yourself through a university partner, an alternative education program, certificate program, and how companies should spend money on doing that. Companies that generally spend money more on professional development, retraining, and upskilling are better at retaining their employees because there's an investment in that employee's long-term success. So I think what we often say is, hey, as an employer, how are you working with the universities? And if not, that's a shame. Let's introduce you, because there's a front door. It's not a back door. It's not a side door. The university wants to work with you and wants to support your growth. And to employees, I would say, this pandemic was a phenomenal learning lesson. And, what's my future look like? What were the challenges? I think looking at our resumes and saying, where can I round out my skills? Is it learning and information technology type program, whether it's data analytics, it might be Python. You can do those even from your house, online programs. Is it project management? I think we all have figured out how to be better project managers, but we could certainly be better and get a certification. So I think what are those things that build my skills that I could take with my current employer, a competitor of my employer, or in a different industry that make me a more skilled and competitive employee for the future. And I think so much of that falls on the employer as well as the employee to be proactive about pursuing that. But I think, the first step is start asking questions, start looking at what's offered. I mean, that's something that we often have. We've had, for example, from CU Denver, Marty Dunn from computer science has sat in with clients to say, here's what we're doing with our students. Here's how that connects to what you're doing. And it's showing that connection, and whether you're an employer or employee, figuring out what that connection is can be really meaningful.
Thank you. Lindsey, did you want to chime in anything that you had on that?
Sure. So I would say from a soft skill perspective, I hear a lot about communication. And Sam, you were talking about this, with culture and Zoom fatigue and some of those other pieces. So how that soft skill of communication and how to effectively get information in work environments where we're not together anymore. Speaking to what you were saying, Allie, about when I was getting my MBA, I would also say collaboration, learning how to work with other individuals, because you're never going to be able to be successful in that silo. So I would say that the collaboration and who to involve and bring to the table is another soft skill. And kind of rounding it out, a third one, I would say emotional intelligence. I hear a lot from leaders about that emotional intelligence. So that would be something too that would be worth investing in yourself in.
Thank you. And thank you to both Sam and Lindsey. That was really amazing. I'm not gonna lie, I was like really not even paying attention to what else was going on, all the comments and stuff, because I think it's so interesting, and I think we are in a really good position. So thank you to everybody for joining. Please note that the CU Denver Business Career Connections team is putting together an all Colorado Fall Business School virtual career fair. So alumni are encouraged to participate and attend as well, and the details will come in that next newsletter. Like I mentioned, this was recorded, so we're going to be sending this out to everybody that attended, and we are so grateful. And if you ever have any questions, you can reach out to any of us on the BSAN, the Alumni Network. You can find me on LinkedIn. Thank you again, Sam, Lindsey. Everybody have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.